Hi everybody. This is Daniel Pinchbeck. I'm here with Jamie Wheal, one of my favorite commentators on the immediate clusterfuck that we're facing as a species. Jamie, yeah, we were talking about that. You wrote this fascinating piece about tech for Jesus, and no longer Jews for Jesus. Now it's tech for Jesus. And Eric Davis, who's also a fantastic writer, came out with a piece almost like the same exact moment. And I guess Jules Evans also had something also. So yeah, you want to, what do you think of Eric's piece in relationship to yours?
I always enjoy Eric's thinking and writing, and it was such a neat kind of, classic Eric. It was a sort of high level, fairly conceptualized, but also still fun and playful take on the sort of psycho-spiritual aspects of it, overlaid with California weirdness, which is one of his deep cut specialties, Silicon Valley, eschatology,
Yeah,
all that
yeah,
stuff. And finally, I think I might have had my thumb on the scale ever so slightly because I sent Eric my piece, and I think I might have finished it. So he was still working on his, and he's like, "Oh shit, we're on the same page." And I had been
yeah.
texting with Jules just about some of the wackiness back channel between the whole psychedelic to left coast space. So in some respects, we were all in conversation with each other, but on the other hand, it's zeitgeisty as fuck right now. I think everywhere from New York Times to the Wall Street Journal to Vanity Fair to Wired to the Atlantic now have all published pieces in the last 2 weeks, all in this vein. So,
Yeah.
some of that is chattering class, trend chasing, but there's definitely a there.
So what would you say is how would you frame, to people who haven't read the pieces yet, like what you're seeing as the thing here?
Well, in a super simple level, it's just that what we used to think of, like that HBO show Silicon Valley, used to joke that it was borderline illegal to be Christian, in the
Yeah,
Valley. And now we are experiencing, I think, two really significant turns in how we think of Silicon Valley and our culture, its impact, et cetera. The most obvious is obviously, Elon coming out of that world and then entering Doge and entering the political arena. But I think adjacent to that, and potentially even an even bigger and longer lasting groundswell, is a turn away from hedonistic, personal, individualistic secularism in the Valley towards Jesus. And especially, we're not talking sort of like mainline Episcopalian or Quaker or Unitarian Christianity. We're talking about a pretty fucking muscular millenarian Christianity. Like shit's happening. It's about to go down. It's the second coming times. It's apocalypse. It's good old John of Revelations kind of
yeah,
coded. And very Manichaean as well. Very, very light versus dark, good versus evil, also playing into end time shit. So you have that. And then at the same time, you have a turn in Silicon Valley away from very socially justicely oriented, both culture, commentary, but also even products and messaging and packaging and positioning into straight up defense contractors. And the interesting thing, and a piece that I don't think, it's right there to connect these dots. It's just I just haven't seen it in formalized publications, which is where I took a crack at it because I was just going to be writing on the strange techno-Christianity that's emerging. But as soon as I was thinking about it, I'm like, wait a second, what the fuck? This is Palantir, this is Endural, this is like, these are all these just burgeoning surveillance and defense companies layering AI onto the battle space. Eric Schmidt has already been doing this clandestinely with his Operation White Stork or whatever he's ended up calling it now, but for the last 2 years in Ukraine. And the US government, there's just been an extensive investigative piece that came out today with like 300 different interviews on US involvement in Ukraine behind the scenes, mostly from bases in Germany, et cetera, but very, very, very hand in glove, far more so than has ever been reported. But one of the telling things that there was a changing of the guard, and and they presented one of the Ukrainian generals with like a thank you shield, with insignia and memorabilia. And he's like, "Why are you thanking me?" And he's like, "Bro, we've been getting to play war games at your expense and learn all the new shit, right, on somebody else's body count." So let's just say that as we move into the reason that every single Fortune 1000, or at least Fortune 5 or Fortune 100 tech CEO, were all on the dais for the inauguration, right? They all realized there will be 1 to 3 decatrillionaires 10 years from now, and I'd really like to be one of them. And Elon's definitely going to be one of them, right? And then who's number two, who's number three? It's fucking up for grabs. So they're all there. They're cutting all regulatory agencies, all congressional oversight of budgets, et cetera, et cetera. And it's fundamentally a spoil system with a mafia boss. So they're all like, hell yes. And then into that opportunistic soup comes the sort of the dormant mustard seeds, right, if we want to riff on the riffs, of this latent left coast Christianity. And there have been a few torchbearers, like the current CEO of Y Combinator and a couple of other places. But then also, you
Is he the one
absolutely
who he's the one who has that group with his wife? The that you
that's
mentioned.
Trey Stevens, yeah, Trey Stevens,
What
and
is it
then
called again? Society
It's Act 17, which is also a proselytizing book in the good book if you go look it up. But it's basically some clever acronym for Christianity and Association for Christianity and Science and Technology, or Technology and Science, something like
okay. Hmm.
that. And they are, as is Americans want, bending Christian theology to suit hyper personally expedient things to just basically be fucking
Yeah.
joyful
Let's
arms dealers.
let's just step back for a half second because I want to get into all that. But I mean, to what extent do you feel there's something legit here in that we're people talk about the meaning crisis, and there's a kind of like maybe like a desperate sense of chaos and emptiness and sort of nothingness, and sort of people are now reached the limit, of what they can stand in that way. So they're beginning to reach for something. And I guess like, maybe Eastern mysticism was the flavor for the last few decades, then Amazonian shamanism. Eastern mysticism kind of got busted, right? Because all of the mystics got, morally destroyed by the Me Too out, whether it's like Bikram or, Trungpa or, so it's like, or Yogi Bhajan. There's that whole Eastern thing, which everybody was really invested in, sort of fell apart.
Well,
Christianity.
in two ways, though, right? We had handsy gurus at the top, but we also had MBSR hyper commodification down below. So it was rent asunder by dueling forces.
Yeah. But I mean, I do kind of feel that, there must there must be some yearning for some kind of cohesive, coherent, like ordering something or other at this point, because yeah, I mean, or do you think that it's mostly opportunistic, you know
I think that, so when you say for people, like a meaning crisis for people, are you thinking specifically right now of Silicon Valley, or more, America as a
Well,
whole?
yes, I am thinking of Silicon Valley. I mean, I'm actually reading Alex Karp's book right now, the guy who's the CEO of Palantir.
Yeah, 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 dude.
uh,
I commented on his Atlantic piece, which was an excerpt from that.
yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that these guys, as he's talking about that piece, like, there was this whole idea that we're trying to make the world more open and connected. Then it became very, that was like an ideology that gave them something to hang on to. Like, we're doing this tech, it's for the good of the future. We're bringing people together, do no harm and so on. And then over time, it got more, commodified, more kind of distorted, and now there's no way to hold on to that ideology anymore. So in a way, Silicon Valley itself is maybe like trying to figure out its soul. And I mean, I'm just riffing here. Do you think there's some truth to that, or do you think it's more opportunistic?
I think there's probably a little soft, chewy 15% center of
Mm,
semi-sincere yet rudderless seekers, and there's 85% opportunistic fucking pile on. I mean, like
mm,
compare any of the analogous industries or subcultures, and you look at the psychedelic renaissance. I'd say again, you have about 15% initiates and/or academics in some pure pursuit of the thing, and then all the crypto and cannabis bros and investors, all the everybody and their mothers piling in because it's the next trend. So without a doubt, there is positive social pressure towards performative Christianity in Silicon Valley at this point, and it's going to get much, much more intense and extreme and coherent.
And what
But,
about the Jews? Are they embracing kind of more traditional forms of Judaism in the same way that the Christians are embracing this Christian thing?
dude, I think the era of looking for or tracing or tracking or policing or calling out ideological inconsistency is over. Because the people who are the least coherent and consistent don't give a fuck about coherence and consistency. So you're sort of like spluttering and puffing like an old, modern major general. No one gives a fuck anymore. You just play through. Everyone's like, but peak headset. What about her emails? Oh, it's so happy. Like, I don't fucking care. Or like, but how are terrorists part of a conservative, free market ideology? Like, it doesn't fucking matter. And the same with Silicon Valley's turn toward Christianity. It's like, wait, did Jesus really say build bombs? Did he really say build a totally fucking satellite-enabled fascist surveillance state and say it's for Jesus and for Western values and to defend civilization and the Shire? Oh, by the way, the Shire, don't forget, because we're hobbits, we're not orcs. It's loopy.
Yeah. And how much do you think that Peter Thiel bears responsibility for this? Do you think he started the ball rolling, or like?
Well, I mean, between you, me, and Rocco's basilisk, I mean, I would say that I think he is the central transferable ideological bridge between some exceptionally
Yeah.
wacky, scary, intense Western chauvinistic fascist mysticism, like Jules Evola, like going back into the 20th century, late 19th century. Like, he's picking up some stuff, and he has been the architect for a decade easily, right, of sowing the seeds of this culture and propagating these ideas. And whether that was whatever his program is of, drop out of an Ivy League and I'll give you the Thiel Fellowship, right? Sponsoring Curtis Yarvin, hosting all of those things, standing up JD Vance's candidacy, hosting that Hereticon that I think you went to, right?
Yeah.
Uh, all of it, all of it, all of it, all of it is translated and coded by Thiel, and in many cases strategically positioned and funded. And the fact that he's behaving more like a Stephen Miller or a Russell Vaught than a Steve Bannon, or an Elon, he's like happy to be getting shit done off camera, happy to
Yeah.
be happy to be seeding these things, seeing them connect and propagate, seeing them take their intended course, and he's nowhere near the explosion. I think he's happy to do that.
Yeah. For sure. I agree
You
with you.
know?
Yeah. But what is the? I mean, this is what I've been wrestling with in my last few Substack pieces. In a way, it's like trying to kind of understand these people from the inside, from their insides. In a way, I mean, um, it's hard for me to understand how these people who were the greatest beneficiaries of the system of constitutional rule and law and the traditional financial structure, why did they decide? And I do understand it. I've looked at but I'm curious what you think. It just seems, even when I try to understand it, it still seems insane to me, because this is like risky business, like when you start a radical, metamorphosis of a inherited structure, that's the one that's provided you with 80 or whatever billions of dollars, that could go pear-shaped. It could go sideways. You could end up with Thermidor, I mean, what do you think that? I mean, yeah, I'm just curious your perspective, and I have mine also.
Perspective on which bit?
Just on why, like, why are they risking so much, considering how much the society, as it was constructed, had given them? Why tear up the rule of law? Why rubbish the Constitution? Why pull us in this extreme direction when you were like the most kind of like supported person of the whole system,
Yeah. Like, whatever you do, don't kill the golden goose. Yeah, and they're like, barbecue the fucker, put it on a
Yeah,
spit. It's
exactly.
a killer pterodactyl. Yeah, it's I mean, I blame settlers of Catan and ketamine. I think that
What's the
basically
first one? I And it's
Settlers of Catan. There's that, that nerdy board game, right? That people, it's like a little baby kind of civilizations game, but you
yeah,
play. And that was one of the disclosures from that Facebook tell-all book that came out a couple of weeks ago from the woman who was quite senior up, and then basically
yeah,
wrote about it all. And she's like, "Yeah, I was on fucking private jets, playing and watching everybody lose on purpose to Zuckerberg, and I
yeah,
didn't. And he accused me of cheating, and then I pointed out all the better moves he could have made along the way." Every single last one of these fuckers is playing Settlers of Catan with simps, and they've got a
yeah,
distorted sense of their ability to rule civilizations, right? And so their sense of how necessary it is, how much better they could do it, right? They have radical confirmation bias, and they've all Peter Principled out as rulers of the universe. Peter Principle, you get promoted
yeah,
to the level of your incompetence. I'm not saying that for you, but I'm saying that for listeners. But
yeah,
the idea of like, yes, they have actually defeated all the boss levels, and like in Elon's case, explicitly, he is both the richest and most powerful man ever in history. So if you were checking yourself, you'd have nothing to not wreck yourself. And if you have a coterie, if you've got your posse around you, who are all literally, their lives are made or broken by their proximity to you and your largesse to them, you're not getting clean signal anymore.
yeah.
You know? So I think it's delusional. It's the
Maybe you
long
and
and
I
the
can
short of it.
maybe you and I can rent ourselves out as a team to slap these guys. Like, they could pay us like $1 million a day, and we'll be like, "No, you fucked up."
You thumb sucking man child. Spend 10 minutes in the corner. Think about what you've done. And now you're going to have to make it right. Yeah.
So, so Jamie, I guess I really, appreciate what you just said. I mean, I think there's different levels to it, but obviously they both had this South African childhood. Their fathers were involved in mining operations there.
Well,
So there's a problem.
as do I. My whole family's South African.
Yeah, I
So,
know. I know.
right. So,
So
so, so know that world
how
well.
how has that? Would you, from your knowledge, then, how does that background shape their psychology? I mean, we got David Sachs, we've got
Hmm.
Thiel, we've got Musk. Is it insecurity, like fear of the black people that are working for you and dying for you in the mines to make your fortune? Is there a sense of like justice or suppressed guilt over what allowed you to have this power? Yeah, just curious if you have any insight.
Yeah, I mean, my own lived experience was that my family straddled the divide, right? So one uncle was the Secretary of Treasury in the '70s, and we like went to visit, and then I was just like, "We're going to Uncle Owen's pool, and he's got a swimming pool. We're gonna go swimming." I was like, "Fucking
Yeah,
sick, super psyched." And there's like dudes with machine guns and pillboxes on the driveway. I'm like, "What's this about?" And then
yeah,
my mother's brother was the Bishop of Johannesburg and was worked directly with Tutu on all of the post-apartheid stuff. So I think the simplest way to describe it is it depends. And but in general, white South Africans do come with a noblesse oblige chip. And unless you uninstall it, right, there is a sense they are quite comfortable dictating to others, and also quite unconscious but pervasive in their orientation of a sort of presumptive benevolent paternalism. I'm
yeah.
doing this for your own good,
Right.
whether you understand that right now or not.
Well, I know that Thiel in college, when he was a right wing ideologue long before he was a tech investor. I mean, in Stanford, he founded the Stanford Review, which was like super right wing and so on. Um, but he used to say about apartheid that actually it was kind of beneficial because on a mean average, the blacks in South Africa had a better standard of living than the blacks in the other countries around. Um, so for him, it was just economic rationality. Um, um, yeah, but I want to get into so I know that we talked about a little of this. I don't know how much you want to share about this, but I know you live in Austin. I mean, I guess I keep waiting. At the moment, I'm thinking about running out of the country, but I keep waiting for a turning of the tide ideologically, where people are like, "This is insane. This can't go on." I mean, people who are MAGA and Maha, having a kind of aha moment and awakening and so on. Maybe that's not going to happen. I mean, I am hearing I just hung out with a friend today who's connected in Washington, D.C. to a lot of Defense Department people and so on. And he's saying that on the right and for defense contractors and so on, many of them are beginning to feel more and more distance and skepticism and kind of negativity towards this situation. Though I'm curious, how are you feeling about that? Do you think that we're going to see any kind of shift or breakthrough, or is this going to be with us for the foreseeable future?
I mean, the bottom line is kind of like, I'm always so humbled. I mean, like when Biden had to fulfill Trump's treaty to exit Afghanistan. So, I mean, people seem to forget that one, but he signed it after he lost the election to shit can Biden into having to act on it. But when Biden did that, right, no intelligence agencies called the 72-hour collapse the same way that agents all whiffed on the fall of the Berlin Wall. Right? Smartest, best minds, best intel, their fucking day jobs, all whiffed it. So trying to predict what's in a chaotic, dynamic, multivariable system is impossible. But that said, so could there be some grassroots uprising? Maybe, possibly, right? Could midterms, if they don't get actually hamstrung, right? I mean, I was listening to somebody. He was a savvy DC political analyst operative. I mean, he kind of knew his ins and outs of what's actually going on. And his biggest concern was like, I don't even think that the 2026 midterms will be free and clear. And then he was describing all the things they're already doing, like Act Blue, they're hamstringing Dems' ability to raise money. It's like it won't be necessarily stuffing ballot boxes, but what it will be is absolutely hamstringing the opposition, almost Erdogan style, so that they can't win. And if
Yeah.
that happens, fucking game over. I mean, Trump already, today or yesterday, already was like, I'm not ruling out a third term. I mean, just to make that super clear now. And you're like, of course you're not. And I know your
Right.
arguments ahead of time, but when we get there, we get there. And so if you end up with a sort of, representative democracy in name only, because everything is, the thumbs are so firmly on the
Yep.
scales that it takes almost blood in the streets uprisings to shift it, then we're in for a wilder and woollier ride. And the suspension, and the thing is that it feels impossible to English this. Like people can put it in a headline, they can underline it in their article or the point they're making on a podcast or an interview, and it's we're completely numb to the words and the meaning of the words. But the
Yep.
idea that the American Republic and the global order and democracy as we've known it, as anything better than a failed state, is potentially in the next 3 to 9 months at risk of being irrecoverable from where we end up after that.
Yeah, it
And our
seems about right.
day-to-day lives, right? And our day-to-day lives might not look that different if you're a more or less privileged American with a decent savings account and something that doesn't get eaten by AI. Maybe your world. But I mean, again, traveling in Mexico, traveling around the world, Thailand, living in South Africa, you're like, oh, normal goes on more or less for an increasingly shrinking chunk of that iceberg, and it's the privileged chunk. And in like
Yeah.
Johannesburg, you still have nice houses, you still have nice neighborhoods. It's just that you come and go from like underground garages and you leave in armor plated SUVs,
Yeah.
but when inside the houses, dinner party, you're indistinguishable, but
Yeah. Of
outside,
course.
capital
Yeah.
versus the district.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's all sorts of different factors, as you say. It's a chaotic situation. It's a very big country, over 300 million people, a lot of different states with different perspectives. Also, um, what do you feel? In terms of kind of like, I don't even like the word resistance. Building some kind of like substantive alternative or opposition. Like it feels like among the things that happened that led to this catastrophe, um, one is Russia. Russia in a sense has won a mind war over the U.S., an information war, and most people are not even aware that they lost a war to Russia right now. Like probably like less than 1% of the population even has a clue that Russia had strategized this out for decades and had developed all these techniques for creating like fragmentation and fissions in the American psyche and so on, fissures. Um, yeah, and then obviously the tech thing that we're talking about, and the Christian thing, and so on. But it feels like, I mean, you can look at charts where there was like quote unquote blue and quote unquote red media. The blue media has kind of like shrunk. The red media has expanded in terms of its reach. People like Joe Rogan with more reach than CNN. People who flipped over from blue to red, like Russell Brand, our buddy. So do you see any way? I mean, it feels like it's a sort of rhetorical, ideological, mythological kind of like thing that's just like moving forward on its own momentum. Do you see any kind of jujitsu move or like alternative or way to flip the dynamic of this thing in any way, or is it you have no idea?
Well, I mean, look, super brass tacks. I would just save all your powder for midterms, because the entire any quote unquote resistance is absolutely powerless with both houses, judiciary and executive, all in one bucket. So there's all fuck all to do until Congress switches, if it does. So as far as like acupuncture points, that's the first one in the stack. Don't waste a single calorie until that's done or not done. On the more culture jamming level, it does feel that if you're not thinking and operating in the term of like Manichaean memetics right now, of like polarized, tribalized battles between good and evil, if you're not slinging your memes in that lane, you're going to get run over by everyone else who is. So the curse of the clever, the curse of the psychedelic, the curse of the spiritual, who can see all sides of everything, and everything is complex and subtle and nuanced. And I heard about it on NPR. You're like, fuck you, bullet to the head. You're done. So like start getting comfortable embracing tribal stories again, embracing vilifying an enemy, even if it's with a nod and a wink, even if it's especially ideally, right? It's Robert Anton Wilson, trickster, Discordian style, right? But it is brainwashing people to think for themselves. Like they're like in the culture war game. Like, who are we up against? We're up against a bunch of fucking nuthatch literalist Christian fundamentalist apocalypticos, and you're like, we can't come up. And QAnon. It's like, seriously, that is like the garbage dregs of the Western tradition, chewed up, turned inside out, and regurgitated onto a table, and people are lapping it up, on Reddit and Telegram. You're like, what the fuck? So telling better stories is the simplest, and telling fun, punchy win-lose stories where you actually, you're smuggling in the infinite game, because the prize for realizing this game is a game, right, is to wake up out of the trance and hopefully get us to the other side of all this. So we, for instance, are playing with, this happened. I think I shared this with you, but it was after being on Jordan Peterson's podcast a few months ago, and I was like, wait a second, how is it that the only people speaking for this entire Western legacy, right, are alt-right nutters? And there's a whole bunch of people, to your very first question, experiencing a meaning crisis right now, right? So they're like, okay, there's nihilism. This is all for fucking nothing, and existential risk and overwhelm and diseases of despair. Or I go to the sloshing to the other side of the Titanic, and I end up hanging on to the fundamentalism, because those are the only people out there, and the middle's been hollowed out. So to me, like, telling really compelling, fun, engaging, quirky, zany, creative, subversive stories and mythologies that orient people in the middle, that provide that rock of Gibraltar to prevent them from sliding into that, but still allow for awe, still allow for, what is the word? I suppose surrender, right? It's almost, to me, I've been trying to study this sort of sociologically and almost, almost economically. What are they doing? Like, why does AA work, for instance? Why are these mega churches booming? Why are mainline Protestant religions tanking? All this shit, like, what's working? And my sneaking suspicion is that it's almost like BDSM, right? Our existential kink, because of our existential overwhelm, is we want to submit. And any of the more nuanced, sophisticated, hyper individualist, you're not the boss of me, and we're all sovereign selves, and I listen to my own inner guru shticks, right? Simply can't hold a candle to I know not what, right? May I receive succor and inspiration from a
Mm.
source other than myself.
Don't you think there has to be some, I mean, silver lining potentially in that? what is false must die, so what is true can be born on some level, right? Like, so something in the whole sort of Burning Man, New Age, psychedelic kind of spirituality,
The
evolution of
Phoenix.
consciousness. What's that?
Yeah. The Phoenix.
All that needed to kind of be disrupted or tossed out, because now we really have to think about it, because this was something I've been screaming about for like many years, like um, the psychedelic movement, which maybe I helped launch a new form, became so much focused on the individual
Mm-hmm.
and not really having like a political or systems level analysis. Um, that yeah, so that people just would go into these, either it was for self optimization or it was for healing, but it wasn't this idea that you're meant to go through this initiation in order to heal the system in a way, like work at a systems level, like, so for instance, right now I'm looking at Audrey Tang's work. Do you know her at all?
Yeah, yeah, totally.
She has a book called Plurality, and this is a trans woman from Taiwan who was part of a student movement there called Sunflower. And Taiwan actually embraced this movement, and she ended up becoming a digital minister and created a whole set of tools to make democracy more responsive and more democratic. And she changed. It went from like 30% trust in the government to like 70 or 80% trust. And she developed, all these tools, because they're also under constant information attack from China. So, for instance, they did like a pre-bunking. So, like, knowing that China would probably start sending deep fakes, they educated the whole population about what that would be like and how to resist it and so on. So it seems like there's a set of tools that we now know on a systems level can help to restore trust in democratic processes and create more responsive systems. There's obviously no way that the Republicans are going to introduce those tools, or Trump is not going to be the slightest bit interested in it. But there's no reason those tools couldn't somehow be disseminated through the U.S. and maybe help us like restore, democracy. But yeah, I'm just thinking about like, how do we move from, at the moment it's so scattershot, like, and in these spiritual movements, it was either about a guru or it was about the substances, about individual experience. How do we move back to working together to heal the system in a way, you know?
Well, I mean, honestly, like, my sense is there's actually a pretty elegant stack, right? Because if you really want to, like, at least for me, right, different people will see things differently and have different bits to contribute, right? But one of mine is, my whole academic career, orientation, et cetera, has been to the Western mysteries. Whether that's first century Gnostic Christianity, Eleusis in Greece, it's the progression, through the eras
Yeah.
of that whole Western esoterica, right? And within that, you're like, okay, so in fact, I think I'm gonna give a version of this talk. I haven't done it yet, so it's still kind of loose in my head. But at Breaking Convention, that psychedelic conference in the UK next month, um, on Good Friday, funnily enough, right next to Exeter Cathedral. So I'm like, fuck yeah, this is definitely the time for me to do it. Stuffy Anglicans be damned. But basically, if you take a look, you're like, all right, the right conservatives they've got the better toy box. They've got way cooler shit in their toy box. They've got honor, duty, courage, sacrifice, history, tradition, civilization, greatness, mythology. They've got all of that. And we've got fucking grammatically inconsistent pronouns, intersectionality, and fragility. You're like, that's a fucking shitty little poo stew to try and
Mm.
mobilize and inspire people with. So you're like, all right, if Christianity appears to be ascendant, at least right now, in alt-right and populist moves from Russia all the way through to, California. Go with it. What's the judo move? Right? Don't try and show up as like a fucking secular humanist Karen, and separation of church and state. You're just going to get mowed again. So actually lean into it. And how do you lean into valorizing and steel manning Jesus, basically, and using that? And the interesting thing about, if you read Tom Holland's book Dominion, he's that English historian out of Cambridge, I think. um, it's become the apology Bible for Western chauvinists these days. He basically makes the case, even though he's not Christian, that hey, so much of like humanitarianism, universal civil rights, like mercy for the dispossessed, all these things are deeply Christian values, even in the secular nation states that evolved from it, right? So like, all right, cool. So now let's take initial rootsy Christianity, Sermon on the Mount, turn the other cheek, et cetera, and then trace that and show it back to conservatives. Be like, look, you're right. There's some super important stuff here. And this turns into universal human rights. This turns into the infinite game, rule of law, no one's above it, Magna Carta, take your pick, right? Like the whole fucking Western story is what Whigs would tell it, right? Conservative Republican voices. And then hold it back to them and be like, look, Christ consciousness is the very, very, very same as participatory inclusive democracy. That's the infinite game expressed in a socio-political context, right? Where love thy neighbor and love thy enemy as thyself is Sermon on the Mount, original, mystical, and inner spiritual. So there's this beautiful continuity across the whole Western tradition. You're like, fucking let's stand up and do this, people. And this is our job, and this is our responsibility, and this is our legacy. And by the way, yes, there is genocide and slavery in the fucking footnotes. So we are honor and duty bound, as well as, D-Day and Normandy and the Vietnam Memorial. There's a lot of dead bodies, white and brown, on this experiment, on this hill. So we are honor bound to redeem all that suffering and to redeem the costs of this, but to not fucking throw it away because we have a bunch of again, apocalyptic theocrats literally just looking to rip the stitches out of the entire 20th century. They're looking to take it back pre-FDR, pre-Woodrow Wilson. And pre-FDR,
Sure.
pre-Woodrow Wilson is Birth of a Nation and the fucking Klan and failed Reconstruction. That's what that, right? And I don't think we all voted for that.
Yeah.
You know?
What's your? I mean, I have my own personal relationship to Christianity, which I can express. But I'm curious. I mean, you mentioned that you have a relative who's a bishop. Did you grow up in church, and did you ever have a sort of visceral relationship to Christ? Do you believe that there was something divine there, or is this kind of like a positional kind of exercise for you?
Well, there was that one time on 3 Hits of Acid, second set on Jerry Garcia solo. I mean, I was like, oh, bro, right on, right on. As a
I
matter of
like your pictures in your article of Jesus with a machine gun.
yeah, no, I mean, funnily enough, my experience was like Church of England, so like Easter's and Christmases, very, very, cultural, but going to boarding schools where, you have chapel, you have cathedrals, you have that whole thing. So steeped
Yeah.
in that, obviously, uncle, etc., but then came and got confirmed in the Episcopal Church, the sort of Anglican equivalent here, at the National Cathedral, funnily enough, in DC. But went to Catholic school, which was fucking completely foreign to me, for 11 years. So I had a very, stranger in a strange land exposure to it. And yeah, if anything, I would make a case that Western psychedelia leaves itself very wide open to mystic Christic experiences and metaphors and analogs. Um, so that's kind of how I would hold it. Non-denominational, heretical and heterodox.
But in your heart and soul, do you think that Christ was some kind of incarnation of a higher force, or do you think he was just a dude, and we've ascribed a lot of things to him because it was the right moment for such a thing?
Funny that you should mention that, because actually one of my heroes and colleagues, Elaine Pagels, the Princeton scholar who did the Gnostic Gospels, she and I
Yeah.
got to a fireside chat in Aspen a couple of years ago. But her new book is coming out this week, and it's on the Jesus meme. And I had written a section in my last book, Recapture the Rapture, about the Jesus meme. And I was like, look, I mean, here's my thing. I think the Jews had it way down, way better, right? Because through all of Judaism, connection and contact with divinity is orthogonal to looking at the thing straight on. And whether it's the fact that the ark of the covenant is behind the curtain in the temple, whether it's the burning bush that is forever burning but is never consumed, avert your eyes, don't you the tetragrammaton, you may not speak the name of God. Like, it's all mystical, metaphorical. And then somehow you fucking flip to the New Testament and everybody becomes literal and fundamentalist. And you're like, wait. So C.S. Lewis said that it's the one clear and outrageous fact of Christianity is you have to accept that Jesus Christ was born of man, was the Son of God and one with God and died and was resurrected for our sins. And you're like, what the fuckity fuck? Like that is a bit of a leap, And if you think about
Yeah.
instead of Jesus as this forever impossible to validate pissing match of historicity or blind faith, you're much more like, well, why don't we consider him a scintillating fucking hyper object from the nth dimension, you know, and just groove on that. And then you
Mm.
have access to awe, you have access to surrender or submission, not my will, but thy will. You can interact with this deity, this God complex or hologram in, I think, more nuanced, more interesting ways. And you just obviate, you just take out of the fucking equation the entire literalist falsification. Because even if you do, if you give fundamentalists, like literalist interpreters, 100% benefit of the doubt, you're like, all right, I'm willing to grant you, historical analysis be damned. Every single word that was laid down in our good book was Pentecostal tongues of fire and was literally and eternally true no matter what by the authors. You're like, all right, let's start there. Now, was that in Hebrew? Was that in Aramaic? Was that in early, middle, or late Greek? Right? Was that King James? Was that some hippy dippy fucking 70s version? Which one? Because every active translation is political. And so if you're like, and we have documented evidence. The Virgin Mary isn't the Virgin Mary till the Nicene Council in the fourth
Yeah.
century. Right? And Alma and Parthenos are two, mean completely different things in Greek versus Hebrew.
What was Elaine Pagel's perspective in this discourse?
Well, fascinatingly, backstory,
Mm.
which I did not know until we were hanging out, but she was high school friends with Jerry Garcia before even the Grateful Dead, and she was at the early acid tests. So they
Oh.
were rolling around, and then she's a beautiful dancer, ballerina. She leaves Palo Alto. She's a faculty brat at Stanford. She goes to New York to Martha Graham to dance, and then realizes, fuck, I'm going to be in the lineup. I'm not going to be prima. So she nips up
Mm.
to Harvard to get her PhD, then ends up on this whole trip. And she just met her and her and a friend of theirs, a mutual friend of Jerry Garcia's and Elaine Pagel's back in like 61, 62, was this English, upper class English aristocrat going to Cambridge playing hooky. He comes up to get his PhD in anthropology. They run around for a summer of love, have a blast, disappears. They meet again 2017 at the Dead shows in Boulder. So he had been the manager for Jerry. Had called him back up and been like, "Come and be our manager." He's like, "I'm a PhD anthropologist from Cambridge. I don't know a first thing about rock and roll." He's like, "Don't worry, we're just hiring our friends." So that guy, Alan, did this amazing, amazing tour, and then they came back, and she's basically, I would say, like I don't know how I would generationally do it, an auntie or a grandmother.
Yeah.
She's Thomas Merton, like the Snowmass Mystics monastery in Aspen. She spends time there. She's fully psychedelically aware and informed, and was lit up in that early '60s original West Coast scene, and then dedicated her career to first century Gnostic mysticism at the most rigorous primary text academic level. So you're like, God bless you. And just hearing her interview with the New Yorker this week, it was like, oh, um, she she's very precise about how she describes her relationship to the archetype of the Christ, the Jesus meme, and anything resembling institutional or orthodoxies. So,
And the relationship being seeing it as an archetype that shapes culture, but not necessarily like a literal reality that we have to, get behind.
yeah, I mean, I
I'm
think
just guessing. I haven't heard the thing.
the simplest is like, who said? Like who said that in order to be a card carrying? Because I mean, there's nothing in the Bible about the church. Doesn't fucking exist
Yeah.
yet, right? So like that was the whole big ricochet of Henry VIII, the Reformation, all that stuff. People started reading the Bible and they're like, wait. 99% of the bullshit rules you've been having us follow aren't even fucking in here.
Yeah.
You guys made a bunch of this up, right? That was the Reformation in a nutshell. And you could make the same case about these literalist shibboleths, right? But sort of requirements for entry, for membership, for being in good standing is to sort of, and to me, it feels like such a wildly unsatisfying cop-out to more rigorous philosophy and theology. It's like, you
Yeah.
mean, and even those friends of ours, Jordan Hall, who was recently became Christian and was featured, I think, in a Free Press article, with Ion Hirsi Ali and the kind of usual suspects. And he's a rigorous thinker, smart dude. And I sort of feel like it's all comes down to like, there's that South Park episode with the underpants gnomes, I think, and they have a
Mm.
slideshow. They're doing their business
Mhm.
like step one,
Mhm.
steal underpants. Step two, question mark. Step three, profits. And like that's the whole joke of their business plan, and they just don't know what the fucking middle part is. And I feel like that's Christian theology at this point. I mean, sure, there's been some smart fuckers, Aquinas and St. Francis, and a bunch of others back in the days, but contemporary American Christian theology just cannot solve for the equation in the middle and just lead a rational person through it. And then it's like
By the way,
phase
somebody
two.
on the John Johnson is asking if this is being recorded. It is being recorded, and I'll put it out on my newsletter. And Jamie, if you want to be a co-host, it'll go out on yours also. But they can pick it up afterwards if that's cool with
Sure.
you. But you're thinking about kind of like reviving or kind of like reconstructing, almost like a church kind of format. Like what could that be in this context, and how could it help this sort of evolutionary movement in a way?
Yeah, because back to that whole notion of we're in Manichaean memetics right now, so you
Yeah.
have to pitch a ripping yarn. And so, yeah, I would even propose to call it the church of the good, the true, and the beautiful, and it's rooted
I
equally.
never like when people use the word good.
Well, no, this is the Platonic triad. This is not
Yeah,
anything
yeah,
else.
yeah,
But
yeah,
we just abbreviate it, Church of the GTB. Right? Are
yeah.
you down with the GTB? Right? Like that's the thing, and it's both Greek and Hellenic, the Eleusinian mysteries. So it's rooted from Pythagoras through the pre-Socratics to Socrates and Plato, and the mystery of Eleusis, and Greek demos, the rule of the people, and then it's
Yeah.
Christian mercy and ethics, and gnosis. On the other side, you're like, look, that's our lineage, right? Like never mind Aristotle and never mind St. Paul. They both sucked ass and couldn't hold their fucking psychedelics. So let's wind it back to Plato and Pythagoras on their side, and let's pump up Jesus and Mary. And the other thing is like Mary Magdalene, Virgin Mary, whatever. You're like, okay, similar concept with the feminine on that side of Christianity. You're like, okay, let's just for the sake of argument say there's just a Mary, me. There's a holographic pulsing thing that is both Virgin Mother, Maiden, Whore, right? All of it in this one construct. And you can even just say, all right, take your Holy Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. And that was always a weird one, right? Everyone's like, Holy Ghost, what's the Holy Ghost? Does he have a nutsack?
Yeah.
Is it like up? Is Casper like Bobby? What's the deal? And they're like, it's all the same. It's kind of one and different. Pneuma was neuter. Ruha in Hebrew is feminine. The Holy Ghost was the sacred feminine all along. And then you have
Huh.
Father, Mother, Child. And you flip the fucking Trinity, so that you have the child at the base, and the two wings are the balanced polarities, the masculine and feminine. You're like, all right, we can do this, and this is not wishful thinking. This is not like a Unitarian fucking whitewash job. This is like rigorous, careful revisionism, but not revisionism in some flighty, lightweight way. It's psycho-spiritual archaeology. You're eroding it back to first century roots of a vibrant condition. And then, oh, by the way, there's ethics. Oh, by the way, there's service. Oh, by the way, we are called to do something better than build weaponized drones or dunk
Huh.
on poor brown people.
Okay, cool. You're getting me a little excited here. So this is like you have like a place in Austin to kind of like construct and a community to bring together. Have you started bringing community together around this, or is it still kind of like in its ideation phase?
No, we have, and it's also something that we're looking to do, like second Sunday's gospel brunch in a box. Basically, like a fucking like a fun and inspiring TED talk, but with all of these themes, not secular, like a TED talk and karaoke. So good fucking redemption song tunes, and then brunch, break bread with your friends and family, and then have
Hmm.
have Jeffersonian dialogue and discussion around the meal. So like ideally, just being able to be like, hey, spin this up. We all need this, you know, and here's a clean way that doesn't require swallowing a fish story, you know, to sign up for participation, because we see so much of that is that
And
people.
is your role kind of like what you just expressed, kind of like really putting down on paper or in some kind of like document, kind of like the sort of the gospel of the new church? Am I talking to the prophet of the future right now, Jamie?
No, I'd be super like super circumscribed, you know, and try like, and I mean, I've taken a cut at writing some of this. I haven't shared it publicly, but basically
Yeah,
that survey of all like American religion that I've done for like the last 5 or 6 Substacks has been a precursor and a wind up to, all right, none of that shit works. What do you think might work? And that was, so really it was just a long wind up as I was doing my own research. Um, but basically being like, look, here's the deal. We're not going to fucking quote scriptures at you. We will tell Bible stories that are especially ones that are
yeah,
both significant and timely, but also have made their way into Western art and literature. So your cultural literacy is expanded if you know about the wife of Lot, or you know about Jonah and the whale, or you know about Job's trial. Like you have access to thousands of years of literature, poetry, song. So you're smarter and better. So we will tell those stories. We'll be red letter Christians or Jeffersonian Christians, where he only cut out the words of Jesus, you know, and he's like, let's just fucking work on that. Like, never mind the miracles, never mind everybody's secondhand shit. Let's just boil it way down,
yeah.
and you know, and bound it. And then obviously the Greek side is equally relevant, equally real. It's just it doesn't have 2,000 years of aggregated baggage that you have to unwind right now. You can say anything you want. You'd be like Pythagoras, and everyone's like, "Yay!" You know, triangles. You know, no one has a dog in those fights. It's unwinding and de-weaponizing, I suppose, or I don't know what
Mm.
but something of bounding
Yeah.
and grounding the Christian inquiry, so that people don't have to have one ear cocked for when you smuggle in the fundamentalist play. You're like, no, this is how we're going to try it.
That's fascinating, and I'm excited to learn more. And I'd love to come and visit at some point. I'm curious, also, kind of like one thing that we've seen is yeah, I guess like there's obviously kind of like a gender schism happening, and men, maybe particularly young men, are kind of gravitating to the right, and these kind of like powerful, very wealthy neo-reactionary forces are playing on that. So they flew Andrew Tate in from Romania, to Florida to speak the language of kind of patriarchy and so on to young people. um, this movement sounds beautiful, but as you described it, it still sounds a little bit rarefied. I'm wondering if you've given any thought to, yeah, like this is something I have been thinking a lot about. Like, how do we deal with this sort of like sort of weaponization of testosterone in a way for this right wing agenda? Like, how do we we know that, for instance, young men were beginning to feel kind of like oppressed maybe by the rising of the feminine, right? A lot of what's happening to me seems to be very much about that, right? Like, women were like 70% of college graduates or suddenly, and were excelling in because basically in a peacetime society, female gifts, which include emotional sensitivity, communication, so on, those are very successful techniques for building companies, for it began to feel that women were starting to excel in a way. And this feels like a giant kind of like push from this more like regressive masculine, that Trump, and all these guys represent, Hegseth, obviously. And they're kind of like trying to carry, the masculine, particularly all the young men, into this, muscular kind of like, weaponized kind of ideology and reality. I guess I'm wondering, yeah, what is there on the other side that could provide like an alternative model or role model, or anything like that? Just curious if you have any thoughts about that.
I mean, sure. You know, it's gonna sound really uninteresting and kind of cliched. You know, it's like, okay,
Sure.
look, if we ended up with it, you know, for the sake of argument, right? If you said that the last 10 years to 30, depending on how you want to count, has been a feminization of valorous or noble masculinity, and even then a criminalization in the sense of, yes, all men, me too, et cetera, the
Yeah.
vilification, right? Therefore, what we're seeing now is a pendulum backlash. Therefore, what comes after that is some synthesis to the antithesis, and we ended up with integrated masculine and feminine. Yay, you know. But getting there, I think, would be, quite tricky. Um, totally valuable. That's kind of why I wanted to just point out the reinstating of the Holy Spirit as feminine, and a mother father child dynamic, which is family unit, not some esoteric abstraction. And then also, even that notion of like a Mary meme, an Artemis and Apollo, the twins are on the Greek side. So they're doing a similar thing. And Artemis embodies everything from like Catalhayuk, like Anatolian fertility goddess in Cybele, all the way through the Virgin Mother at Ephesus, and Diana Artemis, right? She goes from big titted, big bellied fertility goddess to increasingly slender and girlish and virginal in her progression, but she actually embodies all of them. So you're like, all right, look, we need to have mythologies and stories that go beyond fucking Taylor Swift and Britney Spears, and even for the Mary meme, right? Like the Mary meme, you're like, all right, let's lump Magdalene and Mother Mary, because we just don't even know, like let's just do that for the artistic sense. But then let's include Black Madonna in Eastern Europe and Spain, right, which is very Kali-like, and she has shrines, the Virgin of Guadalupe Hidalgo in North America, which is the Corn Mother in body. So let's just like load up these images and archetypes and start working with them sincerely and accurately, but also with a mystic's insight, and start actually trying to propagate, hey, look, healthy Apollo and Artemis, they're twins, right? That is the balance. Jesus and Mary, the memes, like the hyper objects that are not the literalist interpretations, but they are infinitely inspirational for this moment. Can we have a, whatever, depending on how you're counting, a fourth great awakening or a fifth great awakening in this country, comparable to the first two, which were definitive in the 17th and 18th centuries and were wild ass revivals and created women's rights and created abolition and created a lot of very pro social, heartfelt, real things? Also created fucking Joseph Smith and Mormonism, so they were weird mutations. But
That was the second awakening, like Emerson and Thoreau, kind of transcendentalism and so
no,
on.
it was 1803, Cane Ridge, Kentucky. It was basically like an early Burning Man. It was like literally in August on the far western perimeter of the national boundaries. There were like 20 or 30,000 people gathered in the hills of Kentucky, picking bluegrass and banjo, getting laid, getting hammered on whiskey, and then preachers, just like DJ sets, would be up on scaffolds and frothing the crowds into like ecstatic frenzies. And this went on for like 2 weeks. So like subsequent ones depends, right? You can take the 60s Jesus Christians. You could take, different scholars do different shit. But the point being is that a great awakening in this country that is actually a shaking off of established orthodoxies and perversions and pollutions, and something in favor of something more direct, experiential, and socially oriented. You know, to me, that plus winning the midterms is kind of where my
Mm.
bets are, as far as actually anything that you could get to spark off that actually has the capacity to self-propagate, catalyze, and actually do something, versus like liking Robert Reich's shit on Instagram.
Mm. I do like Robert Reich's things on Instagram, but yes, I hear you more than that.
Plus
um,
one. Yeah.
I like what you're laying out here. I mean, I guess sometimes I've thought that. I mean, I was always very impressed when I went to Dharamsala, which is where the Tibetans have their headquarters, and I saw the young monks doing these sort of dialectical reasoning exercises where they would sit in the public square. They would make like a point about, kind of Buddhist philosophy, and then they would like clap their hands, and the other guy would make a counterpoint and clap their hands. I feel like we actually don't have a sort of public reason kind of like place in our society. Like people are kind of marinating in kind of prejudice and opinion, and you actually need to have some kind of like dialectical kind of kind of like that also is good for men too, because men tend to be it's a part of the masculine, I guess, is like wanting to like reason things out. Not that women don't do that also, but it's particularly a masculine trait. So maybe that could be part of your new church of the good, the true, and the beautiful, a way for people to, it obviously doesn't have to be men, but sort of public reasoning. Yeah, we kind of seemed like we really lost that in a way.
Well, I mean, yeah, we've kind of sketched that out because we did that in our earlier lives. Ran an outdoor school, so it was based on Arnie Ness's deep ecology plus Knoll's outdoor stuff, and it was kids in prep schools and boarding schools, in junior, senior year, college, etc. And you know, basically time in the backcountry. So a full-on 2 to 4 week expedition where you're just learning your shit and handling your shit is a profound rite of passage. Taking a 9 day wilderness first responder training is super duper empowering because you're a sheepdog. You're not a sheep anymore, and your situational awareness and your duty to help just goes through the roof. So that's a psychoactive practical initiation, and then community service, the idea of like you actually show up. And so we do this with our community, like those three things: 40 hours of service in your community plus that wellness medical training plus the outdoor initiations. But it's not like vision questy initiations. We go do real shit and teach technical skills, but we're also reading Gary Snyder and Joanna Macy and doing simulations and war games and theory. So it's like it's very curriculum rich. It's not just camping, and those things. I mean, everybody wrings their hands about it. We don't have rites of passage anymore, da da da. And you're like, absolutely right. But you also need, like the Eleusinian mysteries, you need techniques of ecstasy and/or transformation that really do deliver on the die before you die. If it's just ersatz arm waving, like bar mitzvahs and graduations and things like that, then people lose faith in, do I have different obligations, responsibilities, and identities on the other one side of this thing from the other side of this thing? And having those does feel essential for them to work, for them to do the thing they're supposed to do.
Nice.
Like set aside childish things. And now Maria Montessori, right? She had that very great saying. She said basically all kids want to know two things in their life. They want to know, what am I good for, and what am I good at? And if you can provide them or help them discover answers to those two questions, you'll be on your way to healthy and well-adjusted folks. And giving credentials, right? Having them train and learn and then receive a card like you are good for this, whether it's a scuba certification, a second language certification, medical, training, whatever it might be. But like, look, I can participate productively in society, and you don't have to just take a gamble on me. I've done some work ahead of time. Feels super duper important.
Yeah, that's really cool. Oops, I had a question for you, and then there was like a notification, and I had a brain malfunction. Let me see if I can come back to it. Oh, it's almost there. It's almost. Oh, I don't know. It's gone for the second. You have a question for me?
Well, I mean, certainly, you've kind of tackled a fairly wide range of interventions. Oh, I know what it was. Okay, yeah, I'll ask you a question. Because you gave me feedback. You gave me some quite lengthy feedback on that piece, and you said something along the lines of me wanting from me to so effectively bear or share more of my heart in my writing, not be so kind of glib and bouncy about it. And I was having a conversation with Julie, my partner. I was like, Daniel's kind of fucking trying to egg me on to share more, but on the one hand, I don't. And if I'm making a socio-political observation, I don't feel like my feelings about it actually matter. Of course, I have my thumb on the scale as far as how I write the thing, but like I'm outraged, I'm incensed, like if I were to write about me. But I have noticed you've been doing that. You've been sticking your neck out in the last 6 to 9 months. For me, I guess I was feeling like I want to hold my bullets. I feel like this is a deer hunter situation, not a Pulp Fiction spray and pray situation. So like when I was talking about midterms, I'm like, I will write some things before that, but until then, I don't want to be seen as in the tank in the culture wars for one side or the other. And I want to be able to reach as many people as I possibly can. You have been taking a different tack, at least as reading you. What's informed that decision for you? And why do you feel that is, well, just explore that for me, because you've taken, you take the hits in the comments, you do all the, you're doing a whole host of things with causes and effects, and I'd love to hear how that's been for you.
I'm not very, I've always had a problem where I'm just not a very political person.
Mhm.
And I'm just not really taking attack. Like I actually, my heart is broken right now. Like I'm so sad that our society has crumbled to this degree, and that we could be looking at concentration camps, that like people are being like picked up from the streets, that like there's our whole cultural discourse has collapsed into this like sludgy, disgusting nightmare. I'm just sad and angry. I'm angry that these people who are so incredibly greedy have been allowed to dominate our society. And we have this sort of ruthless kind of like money system, and it's destroying everything. It's destroying the planet. Like I think we're not even talking about the ecological crisis anymore. They want to, they've taken the climate change and all that stuff off of the, out of the websites and everything. But the reality is that,
Greenland is
we
suddenly looking very interesting.
what's that?
I said Greenland is suddenly looking very interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there are lots of deep structural reasons why they're looking at Greenland and Canada,
Yeah, yeah.
both in terms of the the energy and the resources to power artificial superintelligence, which Musk and Thiel believe will make them immortal, and the idea that we can resettle whoever they want to save up north
Mhm.
as the global south and the southern U.S. start to melt down. So I think it's a very intentional. I mean, it also fits in with Elon Musk's grandfather's technocracy political party, where they saw a kind of giant North American technate, from Greenland and Canada down through the Panama Canal and Mexico as one unit that would be under the control of a engineer dictator.
Mhm.
So they're basically following that model. But yeah, so I mean, for me, I've never felt that the people are like, and sometimes I get people are like, oh, you're so in your head. Or I always feel that like the brain and the heart are actually very connected, and so what spurs me to want to write or express anything is like the heart, and so, and I think that I mean I've really enjoyed this dialogue with you, and I think you have incredible gifts. But sometimes in your written work, I want a little bit more of just like it feels often very like uh, tight in a way, like so much packed in, and I just want a little bit of I just want to feel you more, like a little relaxation, and yeah, a little more. Where are you at? And I feel it in this conversation actually quite a lot in a way that I don't always with your writing, um, which is
Hmm.
great. I mean, I love your, and I think you're doing a great job. But I think also like maybe sometimes because we spend a lot of our times in these realms, we overestimate where other people are, and actually that most people need more unpacking and repetition. In fact, when I look back at my career, one of the big mistakes that I made was not wanting to repeat myself. Like I wrote my first book on psychedelic
Totally.
shamanism. Like, okay, I said
Yeah,
what I wanted to say. It's done. Then I
100%.
wrote a second book on all these other things. I was like, okay, but I didn't. If I had been, more on it, I would have realized that you actually have to say things again and again in different cadences, and that's actually like and try to simplify in a way to reach a bigger audience. Like the 2012 book could have been like 4 books, broken up and stretched out. So I think it's we want to bring people with us so they feel that they're on a like standing shoulder to shoulder with us on a plateau. And I think the way to do that is to sort of like slow down, be patient, like come back to the same ideas. Like that's how I feel. But I mean, everyone does their own shtick, so that was just it. Like when I read your stuff, I sometimes feel like it's so tight and there's so many, kind of like things hitting me. I'm like, oh, whereas like I want to just slow it down and yeah, allow some air and some something like that. Yeah,
Well, I must confess, I have a pathological fear of being underwhelming. So,
yeah.
I tend to I tend to go both barrels most of the time.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think it's okay to be underwhelming. I think people actually really appreciate it. Most people are not as don't have the same fast level, mind that you have. You have a very specific mind, and I think you could actually help a lot more people learn. And it's like, yeah, because you had the strategy around the election, and I kept sort of saying like, Jamie, don't you want to like tell people to vote for fucking Kamala Harris so we don't have fascism? And you kind of held your powder, and then you had this one post near the election. But I think it was like too staccato. Like people actually to be influenced by somebody, they need to feel it, they need to hear it, they need to get a repeat, they need to have it slowed down, they have it in different cadences, and then they're like, oh, okay, like I get it. Like I mean, yeah, it was very like somebody wrote to me today. I put them on my free subscription list. They're like, oh, at first I thought you were just kind of like boring and like left wing. Then I started reading your things more closely, and I saw that, then suddenly they were like, now I'm like on every word, and I was like really
No, I realize
happy.
you're nerdy and left wing, and that's a
Yeah,
whole
exactly.
that's a whole bigger bucket, you know.
A super nerd. Yeah. So that's all. I mean, I think you're doing, what you're doing is great, but I just, if I was your editor, which I've been an editor, I would have you just open up a little bit. If you ever want to like experiment, we could, we could experiment a little bit with that. You know.
Well, a couple of things. I mean, one is firing these off in a day, and they almost always get bigger than you plan, as I'm sure you experience. I'm like, oh, I'm just going to write a quick little thing on
Yeah.
American religion, and it's going to be one. It's
Every
six
day.
later. I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
So,
I know.
so yes, no, there's a slapdashness to my
Yeah.
Substacks that doesn't show up in my books. Um,
Yeah.
but also to your point about never wanting to repeat, like I've written all of this stuff over the last 5 years. I dealt with global population, dealt with the fucking Moloch traps of capitalism, dealt with like
Yeah.
basically signposted all the different ways we're super triply doubly fucked.
Yeah.
And I have already grieved for Western civilization.
Mhm.
And I feel like we're living through the denouement of the inevitable. And
Yeah.
so to share my actual personal feelings and to share my actual heart is often to disillusion people at a rate they might not be able to handle, and to
Yeah.
reside in the broken-hearted grieving of the
Well, don't
post-traumatic.
go that far.
Well, that's why I
I
fucking
mean,
hang out in some cynicism and some funny hashtags, my man. Because it's like at least we gotta laugh, or we'll, or we'll.
I wrote one piece about how for Facebook. I wouldn't write it for Substack, where like something I think we only have like sometimes I think we only have like 10 years left before we go extinct. And yeah, I mean, there was like a slapdash thing for Facebook, and then I was like, you know what? I don't really like. I don't want to like lose 100, subscribers. I don't want to like make everyone miserable, So yeah, there is calibration, for sure,
Yeah.
Um,
So
but
so I
yeah,
try and take a sort of trickster Tom Wolfe, Oscar Wilde angle on it, and then at
yeah,
least people are a little bit smarter. I mean, even just from my days, teaching at outdoor schools, like I never taught down to my students, even if they were like
yeah.
AP history kids. I'd be like, "You're
Oh,
fucking
I'm not.
not
I'm not. I'm
anyway."
not talking about. I'm definitely not talking about dumbing down. I mean, slowing down and dumbing down are not the same thing. Slowing down is
Or,
just giving people a little bit more space to kind of receive the compact, punches in a way. And yeah, as Gil said, I enjoy Damie's writing. I do too. I love it. But that was just since he asked me, I just had felt this little bit of comment. You could. I love comments and criticisms, back too. So if anything occurs to you, let me know. Yeah.
no, dude, I get that often. It's one or the other. It's like, you're making my head hurt, or you're super duper triple bumming me out about things I didn't think about, or I laughed,
Mm.
thank you, right?
Yeah.
Or word salad, and I had to look a bunch of shit up. So like, it's all over the place, and I accept that for sure. But since these ones are for free, it's like, fuck it, I'm gonna have fun with it. So in
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
respects, it's
Sure.
mildly therapeutic just to at
Yeah.
least enjoy our creative processes.
That was actually the question that I forgot that I was going to ask you before. Let me see if I can put it into good language. Yeah, like where we are now, in this, neo-fascist, tech feudal takeover of society. Does this feel like unanticipated or unexpected to you, or does it feel like an inevitable, consequence? Does this just feel like the natural progression of everything that you'd been, kind of anticipating, or do you feel still kind of like shocked by what's going on?
I would say it is much faster, much worse, or much worse, much faster. It's all happening, and it's all happening without any more checks and balances or ebbs and flows. Um, and even it was like Russell Vaught's buddy. It was the co-author of Project 2025 that got canned. He was the sacrifice
Yeah,
firing 6 months ago. He was just interviewed last week, and he's like, he was giddy. He's like, I'm out
Yeah.
of my ear, but this is fucking amazing and way crazier and better than anything we dared dream
Yeah.
of. Right? So that's happening. And that's happening on top of the substrate foundation of a world in multiple overshoots that's not penciling out. So you're like, oh, okay, we're not going to be having COP 33 conferences, and we're not going to be having our Manhattan Project / Victory Garden moment where the world rallies together under a handful of inspiring leaders and a coalition of the benevolent willing. We're not going to play
Yeah.
that game, I guess. I guess this is going to descend into Mad Max fucking ethno-tribalism, and and climate change will be banished as a thought crime, but we'll just be living tits up through it.
Yeah.
So somebody had asked just a question of culture architecture and neuroanthropology and like as tools, right? And so super quickly just to just define them, right? Neuroanthropology would just be at least how I look at my profession, what I was trained in academically, et cetera. But it's like you take a look at what's happening in the world, anything interesting, and you look at where the historical precedents of things like this in the past. And now you have a bigger data set of instances of a thing like this. Take breathwork, for example. You could take a look at current holotropic breathwork. You're like, oh, it's all the rage. It's happening on Friday night with the big dumb hat crowd. And then you're like, okay, breathwork, 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 breathwork. You look at free diving. You look at fucking Tibetan chanting. You look at Catholic prayer. You look at Aboriginal didgeridoo playing. Like all of these do something with spirituality and respiratory control or patterns. You then say, what's the mechanism of action? Why does that shit work? Why does Hail Mary, full of grace, which is 9 seconds long as a 9 hertz entrainment thing, right? Blow off CO2, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's the same as Om Mani Padme Hum in Tibetan Buddhism, and circular breathing on a didgeridoo increases nitric oxide 15 times and gets you into dream time. You're like, neat, right? So that's neuroanthropology. Once you understand the actual, plausible, repeatable mechanisms of action behind a given sociocultural practice, now you understand what the there is. Then you can look forward into culture architecture. And you're like, all right, how do we build new shit better? And rather than it being a continuation or perpetuation of old superstitions or spinning up weak sauce new ones, you don't have to play that game. You're like, we know functional mechanism of action. Let's lay the Lego blocks in a way that snap together and deliver the results we need for healing, inspiration, and connection as broadly distributed social glue for functioning ways of being together. So I hope that speaks to your question.
Yeah. The question on the chat. I think that was a
Yeah.
good answer. Cool. Well, we've been chatting for an hour and 20. Maybe it's a good
Oh,
time to wind to a close. We've had nearly 500 visitors to the call, which is really sweet. I think this is a fantastic tool, by the way. I hope you start using it. The Substack Live. I love how instant it is, and you can see from the level of the comments, it's like I think that Substack has really become the kind of forum for the moment in terms of like more intelligent, thoughtful, reflective people gathering.
interesting.
I am concerned about the where this platform will end up, considering that Andreessen Horowitz are major investors in it. But at the moment, it's a very useful tool, and yeah, we should do it. We should do more. I don't know if you could do 3 people. I think it's very interesting to do a chat with you and Marianne Williamson, or I could just connect you two, because I think the layers that you're bringing into kind of this Christianity church idea could be useful for her. It's yeah, I don't know, might be interesting. We should definitely try to like, that's another thing. It's been interesting to me how people in our progressive neo-spiritual cultural world were really not very good at collaborating compared to the people on the right, who seem like much more like I don't know why they just they don't have they all sort of work together, like there's no it's kind of weird, like I
Onward,
mean maybe,
Christian soldiers, man. There's rank and file and hierarchy.
yeah.
Actually,
Yeah, and
can I just riff on one thing as a public
yeah,
service announcement?
whatever you would like.
So I don't know what I think. I think you're probably having similar experiences to me, but in our friend groups that are, let's just say, Elon / Bobby stands somewhere in that space. Um, I'm perpetually shocked to the point of almost just like getting hacked off and almost leaving group chats with otherwise friends I know, like, and trust, who are just slinging the most unvalidated bullshit from the bowels of Twitter on, crazy inefficiencies. Look what USAID, blah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And it's like, look, man, if I can fucking fact check this in one Google search, you shouldn't have been polluting our feed with this bullshit. And shame on you. You're smart, educated, successful, powerful, have responsibilities. What the fuck are you doing retweeting this shit? And it really feels like there's a version, like everyone is confusing diagnosis with prescription, because the prescription of like absolute shit show that's going on right now, and the chainsaws and wrecking balls and the complete theocratic takeover under the guise of efficiency, under the guise of the will of the people, all that kind of stuff is absolute bullshit. But when you call out the factually inaccurate tweet, or 40% of Social Security calls are all fraudulent, I looked that up. I'm like, no, it said 40% of all claims are processed through phones. Someone just fudged 40% in their meme slinging, right? So you're like, okay, the diagnosis: government is bloated, country's inefficient, we've got lots of debt, the rest of the world doesn't pay their fair share, like all those things. Diagnosis, 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 yes. Prescription, they just instantly slip on over to, well, then how can you then have issue with what's going on? What's going on has to be the solution, because they told us it was the solution. Don't you want the solution to that terrible diagnosis? And then I realized, I was like, oh fuck, this is a subset of the Mott and Bailey fallacy in rational discourse, right? Where the Mott is the little hilltop castle, and that's your sane, defensible position. And then the Bailey is the batshit crazy stuff you say out there until challenged on it. And then you go retreating up to your castle. So right, so our good buddy Zach Bush is a classic fucking abuser of the Mott and Bailey fallacy, right? Where his Mott, the little defensible castle, is like, hey, glyphosate's really bad. We've destroyed our soil health. That affects our microbiome and our guts, and we would be healthier and probably not need some medicines, including vaccines, if we all had healthier soils and guts. And everyone's like, yay, Zach. And then he's like, and if you take a vial of blood and you send it to a lab, quantum physics makes I can change the fucking pH of my blood. If I take an aspirin, the pH of my blood will change in the lab in Europe. And you're like, no, it won't. He's like, and then we're all going to go sterile in 10 years, and we're going to mutate our 12-strand DNA to become new soul tribe people. And you're like, wait a second, what
Yeah.
the fuck? And then he's like, when I was at UVA in the oncology lab, and he's
Yeah. So
back to his fucking Bailey.
what's happened? What's happened?
What's happened to people's discourse, or what's happened
Yeah.
in some
What's
way?
happened? Why are people unable anymore to make distinctions? Because why can't they see where they're
Because the
going
Flynn
over?
effect, the Flynn effect has stopped. If anybody's familiar with that, it was the whole idea that IQ was just rising organically
Yeah.
over the 20th and early 21st centuries, and it stopped. And initial analysis slash plausible connection is onto Height's phone thing. Like, screens and phones are making us dumber than rocks, and we're
Sure. The
outsourcing so much of our
microphone.
computational
Yeah.
and
Was just being
cognition,
recorded. Yeah.
right?
We're
So
losing our cognitive capacity.
absolutely. And of course, I mean, all the stuff, right? Tristan's social dilemma stuff, all of that. But like the idea of like outrage, outrage and pushing a button. Like, there was one where, it's not Kayleigh McEnany, is it? What's the press secretary's name? The young woman who's like 28,
I have no idea, but I know who you're talking about. The blonde one.
whatever her
Yeah.
name is, right?
Yeah.
And I saw a tweet by her supposedly that had said something along the lines of, well, even if we did lose all electricity, our founding fathers got by without electricity, so we should be able to too. Right? Something along those lines. So it kind of struck a patriotic note. It was sort of tone deaf and oblivious about infrastructure collapse and the implications for citizens. And it was coming from, you're like, get a load of this. And I was like, wait a second. I think I've just been hijacked. And I just Googled it, and nope, she had never said that. And that was a meme.
Yeah.
And people
Yeah.
were slinging the one about Elon being like, I can do piles of ketamine and I have infinite tolerance. And I was like, and all I was seeing was screenshots of that. And I was like, wait a
Yeah.
second, is there a live version of this tweet anywhere? No, there wasn't. Right.
Yeah.
And so we are, in the same way that we've become digitally ADD, digitally autistic, and digitally narcissistic, we're also becoming digitally moronic. And so you take away our phones and screens, and people revert back to more
I
or
mean,
less normal.
I think one thing that happened is like sometimes I think about this, that there was like a connection between how people perceived kind of like rational authority structures and even just something like graphics, right? Like, before you would like go to the New York Times or the Atlantic, it would just look different, or like CBS, it would look professional, it would look like honed, but now, tiddlywink conspiracy site can look just as professional, or Alex Jones Infowars looks, pretty much just as good as like MSNBC or whatever. So I think, there's a way that, if you've decided that the mainstream media is, dissembling and untrustable, you no longer have a sense. You're unmoored. You don't know
Mhm.
what factoid is legit. So then it's like if something just attracts your attention in that second, you kind of gravitate to it, and you have this idea that the actual there's no kind of like authority structure anymore, or I mean, do you think that's part of it in a way?
Well, there's the sort of, you know, good faith overwhelm. Like I am just not equipped to deal with the sugar highs and temptations and distortions of AI, deepfakes, and algorithms. Can't do it. I don't have the cognitive bandwidth. I didn't have the Jesuit training, right? So there's that. I'm trying, but I'm just failing at it. And then there's also the worst is the sort of middle ground where I'm not 100% keeping my eye on the ball, but I've also got a healthy dose of that kind of anti-establishment contempt because that's always a good fallback. So like I mean, the same text thread, right? These friends of mine yesterday or this morning had posted the thing on you know, Zelensky threatens Putin, nearly assassinates him, blah, 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 blah. And then isn't it curious that no MSM media is covering this? And I was like, yeah, that's really fucking curious. Let me look. And I went and looked and I couldn't find anybody outside like Hindustan Times, South China Paper, Russia Today, and random blogs for 2 pages. I'm like, there's not a legit news organization on the planet that is covering this, right? Not Al Jazeera, no one. And so I was like, I don't think that happened. That's my working assumption. That's my working assumption is that this
Yeah,
gave birth as a bullshit fucking meme on Twitter.
yeah,
And yet, right, on that social security thing of like 40% are fraudulent, that's what Elon's up to. He's fighting the good fight. I said, look, guys, I said, please don't sling shit in our feed. Like fact check it. And I said it's in Washington Post's original journalism, second invalidated by Forbes. I'm going with their stats, and my response from one of my friends was like, "Oh, and the Washington Post fact checks, ha." And you're like, okay, look, I totally understand where their political leanings are. They're center left, but they're in no way fucking lefty. And by and large, yes, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Sunday fucking Telegraph, like these places do actually still have fact checking. I do
yeah,
privilege right? Legit information, the Atlantic,
absolutely.
right? And if you give that up, right, because you can't keep up with keeping your own bearings and making sense accurately and effectively and credibly, and instead you default to that kind of broy cynicism and
Yeah,
anti-establishment bias, then I feel like you're a fucking part of the problem.
yeah. But what do you do with all these people, which seem to be such a large number right now? Like,
I am staggered.
I mean,
I'm staggered by the number of psychedelic
yeah,
burner slash fill in the blank,
yeah.
otherwise supposed to be on Team Human. If any of these things we
I mean,
believe are supposed to help people.
that's honestly partially why I just feeling like I have to just flee the country at this point, because
Mhm.
it's like if even those people are unable to, kind of sort of get out of this cobweb of delusions and poor, failed reasoning, I just think that the whole thing is going to collapse. Like I don't see. I mean, they're it feels like I mean, I guess fascism, there it could associated with like Thanatos, the death drive. It
Mhm.
feels like there's a underlying death drive that our society is trying to commit suicide. To me, I mean, they're taking off all of these protections like crypto. They're introducing financial protections, environmental protections, closing, the Institute of Health, kind of like, closing immunology, like anything that like would protect from diseases going crazy, putting this lunatic RFK into that position. Um, it feels like there's a death wish as a result of this sort of collapse of meaning that people don't know. They're like caught in like some kind of loop. I don't know. Does that make sense to you, or how do you feel that's going on?
Gosh, I mean, I'm still going to default to the sense that I think there's an overwhelming majority of fundamentally good-hearted, live and let live humans in the world,
Yeah,
and that what we're experiencing are amplified distortions of the extremes. But that said,
yeah,
they have disproportionate power as well. So it's not nothing. It's not just like we're just hearing louder volume on their speakers. So what I would love to do, I don't know why this would be so crazy, terribly hard, but is basically not necessarily a steel man, but just like no Russell conjugation, like no slipping in, impugning of motive, but just being like, hey guys, this is what we think is going on. It seems like Elon bought the presidency and believes he bought the presidency, is acting on that presumption. And I happen to, have fairly close hand reasons to believe that's true. Um, he's acting that out. He first went after the agencies that were regulating him or litigating him. He then went after culture war targets, and when he ran out of his own, he had Russell Vought and Stephen Miller calling in airstrikes, which they've been preparing for 5 years behind that. Russell Vought, as well as the 5 Catholics on the Supreme Court, have been validating, as of last July, a position of the
I
unitary
think
executive power,
yeah,
right? And believe that l'état c'est moi, right? I am the state, I am the king, and my will is thy will. We're gutting this. That liberal institutions like Harvard and Columbia and Ivies and everywhere else are actually enemies. They're not
yeah,
American institutions to be reformed. They are enemies to be destroyed. And then throw in the suspension of all inspectors general, all military JAGs, all surveillance, the white shoe law firms, et cetera. So you're like, okay, so that is actually what's happening. And it's happening very clearly and very transparently according to their own playbook and according to their own words. So this is not impugning of motive,
yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. Hey, America, are we cool with this? Do we actually think that we need to revert back to a 19th century balance of, regional fucking tin pot dictators, of which we're going to be job one in the Western Hemisphere, but Russia and China are going to eat their own? And are you guys cool with this? And by the way, separation of state, of church and state, which was founding religious tolerance of this nation, we're undoing that also. And are we cool with this? So like, you might be rooting for it. You might be thinking it's the worst thing ever, but can we at least fucking agree on the same thing we're looking at? Like, that to me just feels like step one. And it just requires, like I said, just avoiding Russell conjugation of like, impugning motive, sliding in, shady words like Vox.
What is Russell conjugation?
So it will be, what is Russell conjugation? He asked snarkily. It's
Yeah,
adding in, right, biased words to
I see.
impugn motives. That's it. So can we just, and again, it's not steel manning what's going on. This is a fucking nightmare. But can we actually
Yeah.
just call a spade? And can we just have Americans be like, okay, now I might be all in on that hypothesis, or this could be like 1% whack-nut Christian theocrats, and that was not my people. I just thought Kamala sucked, and I didn't like the price of eggs. That's why I'm here, you know. And I think that, to me, just without hysteria, although there's hysteria is 100% called for. Like, I actually, it's fire in a burning building,
Yeah.
yes, but the building is on fire, and this is the Reichstag.
So how do you look at the possibility of getting that, kind of like what you just kind of articulated there as a kind of, statement that could be agreed upon or not agreed upon?
Well, I mean, in some tiny little way, I try and chip away at that on those Substacks. I just sort of point stuff out and just kind of call it and be
Right.
like, "You guys
But should it
see
but should it
this
be
looks like."
kind of like, kind of like written out as kind of like, this is the situation, and then that is like circulated, or people can kind of like vote for it in a way or vote against it, in various forms.
Yeah, I mean, my argument would be like, hey, again, let's just give you full credit for voting for Trump for all the positive reasons and value-based reasons you thought you were. Now, um, are you aware that the status and the future of the republic, that the viability of the infinite game is at stake?
Yeah.
So this is no longer just about political parties. It is the breaking of institutions. And
Yeah.
can we acknowledge the truth and value and decent intent that you had on
Yeah.
voting for the policy statements you thought you were voting for? And can we still grant you those? Because you guys won the election fair and square, so you have to absolutely have the 4 years to enact those policies as best you can. But can we entice you to take a stand against the process, which is ends justify the means, and which is fundamentally and antithetically anti-American?
Yeah. Well, let's craft that. I mean, I think that's a simple, we could extract that from what you just said and kind of like extrapolate on it, and circulate that. You know, like see if we can at least get basic buy-in on the narrative of what's happening. You know.
Yeah, I mean, I always find like it's infinitely more because your point, right? If you like felt like reading me or listening to me was like sometimes, and you wanted to be soothed, right? Like it's
It's
soothing.
not a question. It's not a question of being sued. It's more that I think that a lot of people don't take in. Even me struggle. The speed at which you go is a lot, and it's great and it's amazing. But I think like people process information at different speeds, and sometimes also when things are this intense, um, yeah, people need to hear it at different cadences. They need like
Yeah, totally.
their emotional body has to somehow be able to sort of handle this. Their psychological structure has to be softened up a little bit. Otherwise, they just like
Yeah.
block it out.
Well,
Yeah,
here's the thing. Here's 100% what I would recommend. So it's that idea of
yeah,
like, hey, in the last decade, and kind of where social justice movement was, right, and the Ibram Kendi's, et al., and even the Ta-Nehisi Coates and that kind of world was the American dream was a lie. Project 1619 Project, all these things. The infinite game, right, of this grand city on a hill experiment was false. Not MLK, who said, I this my check has been returned with insufficient funds, but I refuse to believe the check,
yeah.
the bank is
The dream.
bankrupt.
Yeah,
Always calling up versus calling out. Well, the left
yeah,
basically dismantled the value and promise of the infinite game and the Western tradition. I feel like progressives have to go back into American history, go back and dust off Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, slave owners and fucking sexual molesters and, and all of their sins, and be like, hey, those guys were onto something. Separation of powers matters. Church and state matters. By the people, for the people matters. Immigration as melting pot matters. Remember, fellow citizens, this is what we were founded on. This is what our grandfathers died on the beaches for, right? This is what our mothers march in the streets for. Like there was a grand and beautiful tradition here, and because right now only the right is going back
yeah,
into the past, and it's infinitely easier and has more inertia than trying to spin new ideas, newfangled fucking auto better bees from college campuses. So I feel like, yeah, to tell this story in an empowering, soothing, reminding way of like, we've been better than this. And we've
yeah,
even been great. And we really need to remember that and share it and take a stand for it and protect it and defend it. Otherwise, it's going away.
for sure. I love it. Okay, we're at 8:41. Maybe we stop there for today. That was a
Yeah,
nice long.
perfect.
Well, let's keep doing this. I love it, and let's think about this idea of like how you could present something where it's like can everybody at least agree on what kind of the story is of what's happening right now? Which they've been.
Situational assessment. And then which side are you on?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you,
All right.
Jamie. Love
Well,
you.
thanks
Great
to
to see
everybody
you.
listening too.
Yeah, yeah.
Cheers.
Ciao, ciao.